In the year 70 CE, the Roman legions set fire to Jerusalem. The temple burned, the priesthood scattered, and with them a gospel disappeared. Not the ones you know, not Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. This one was older, written in the language Jesus himself spoke, Aramaic. They called it the Gospel of the Hebrews, and for 2,000 years the church has pretended it never existed. But what if I told you it did? What if the earliest followers of Jesus, the ones who walked beside him, who broke bread in his presence, carried a different story? A version the Roman Church couldn't control. A text so dangerous that every copy was hunted down, burned or buried beneath the foundations of cathedrals. Would you want to know what it said? The Gospel of the Hebrews was not written for Gentiles. It was written for Jews, by Jews, for a community that never believed Jesus came to abolish the law, but to fulfill it in ways the rabbis could not comprehend. It was a gospel that spoke of mysteries hidden since the foundation of the world, and it was silenced. The early church fathers knew of it. Jerome, translator of the Latin Vulgate, claimed to have seen a copy in the library of Caesarea. He called it the gospel used by the Nazarenes, the original Jewish sect that followed Yeshua before Christianity became Roman, before it became Greek, before it became anything other than a whisper in the hills of Galilee. Jerome translated fragments, just enough to let us glimpse what was lost, just enough to make us wonder why it was taken from us. Origen mentioned it. Eusebius listed it among the disputed texts. Clement of Alexandria quoted from it in hushed tones, as if speaking its words aloud might summon something the bishops had worked centuries to bury. They all knew, they all saw, and they all watched as it vanished. Why? Because this gospel did not preach submission to Rome. It did not speak of a Christ divorced from his Jewish roots, molded into a cosmic deity palatable to pagans. It spoke of a teacher, a prophet, a man who walked the same earth as Moses and Elijah, who carried forward a covenant written in blood and fire on Sinai. It spoke of a Jesus who never intended to start a new religion, only to restore the old one. In the fragments that survive, we find strange things. A story where Jesus speaks of his mother, the Holy Spirit, as a feminine presence, not the distant cold pneuma of Greek theology, but ruach, breath, the hovering wind that moved over the waters in Genesis. In the Gospel of the Hebrews, the Spirit takes Jesus by the hair and carries him to Mount Tabor. This is not metaphor, this is mysticism. This is the kind of vision the prophets had, the kind the Merkaba mystics sought in their ascents to the throne. There are sayings in the fragments that do not appear in the canonical Gospels, teachings about the nature of the soul, about pre-existence, about the journey of the Spirit through worlds unseen. These are not Christian doctrines as Rome would define them. These are Jewish doctrines. Kabbalistic, Gnostic in the truest sense, knowledge reserved for those who could bear it. But the most dangerous passage, the one that sealed the fate of this gospel, was not a teaching, it was a claim. The Gospel of the Hebrews recorded that after his resurrection, Jesus appeared first not to Mary Magdalene, not to Peter, but to his brother, James. James the Just, the leader of the Jerusalem church, the man who kept the law, who prayed in the temple, who never ate with Gentiles, who believed that followers of Jesus must first be Jews. Rome could not allow that, because if James was the true successor, if the Jerusalem church held authority, then Paul's mission to the Gentiles, his rejection of circumcision, his letters that would become half the New Testament, all of it stood on shaking ground. The gospel that validated James had to die so that Paul's gospel could live. And so it did, burned with the temple, scattered with the exiles, condemned as heresy by councils that never once asked a Jew what Jesus had actually taught. By the 4th century, when Constantine fused Christianity with imperial power, the Gospel of the Hebrews was a ghost, whispered about, feared, forbidden. But fragments remain in the dry places, in the margins of manuscripts copied by monks who did not understand what they were preserving, in the quotations of heretics whose books were burned but whose words survived in the refutations written against them. The gospel is still speaking. You just have to know where to listen. Some say it was hidden, that the Nazarenes, fleeing Rome's purges, carried copies into the deserts of Syria, into the mountains of Kurdistan, into places where the empire's hands could not reach, that in caves and monasteries forgotten by history, the gospel waits, sealed in clay jars, wrapped in linen, written in the language of prophets. Others say it was never meant to survive, that its destruction was not persecution but protection, that there are truths within it so old, so primal, that to speak them aloud would undo the foundations of everything built since. That the church did not suppress it out of fear of losing power, but out of fear of what power it might unleash. The gods didn't want you to read this, but now the seals are breaking. If you want to find the next forbidden book, follow us. The Gospel of the Hebrews was not alone. It was part of a library, a collection of texts the early Jewish followers of Jesus considered sacred, alongside the Torah and the prophets. Texts that traced a lineage of hidden wisdom back to Adam himself. And every single one of them was marked for destruction. In the 2nd century, a bishop named Irenaeus compiled a list. He called it the Canon, 4 Gospels, no more, no less, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. He said there could only be 4, just as there are 4 winds, 4 corners of the earth, 4 living creatures around the throne of God. It was not scholarship, it was sorcery. He was binding the word, limiting what could be said about the divine, and anything outside his circle was declared poison. But the Jewish Christians did not submit. They kept their books, the Gospel of the Hebrews, the Gospel of the Ebionites, the Gospel of the Nazarenes. Some scholars argue these were 3 different texts. Others believe they were variant names for the same forbidden manuscript, copied and recopied, each version shifting slightly as it passed through different hands, different communities, different centuries of survival. What united them was this: they all rejected the virgin birth, not because they denied the divinity of Jesus, but because divinity in Jewish thought does not require it. The Messiah was to be born of the line of David, fully human, fully anointed, the son of Joseph and Mary, a man chosen by God, not a God pretending to be a man. This was the original faith, and Rome could not tolerate it. Because if Jesus was only a man, then so was every Caesar who claimed to be divine. If the Messiah was a prophet and not a deity, then the entire imperial cult, the worship that held the Roman world together, collapsed. Christianity had to be remade, refined, Hellenized, turned into something that could coexist with emperor worship, that could replace it without threatening the structure of power itself. The Jewish Gospels were the last obstacle, and so the Inquisition began, not in the Middle Ages, in the 4th century, under Constantine, under Theodosius, Christian emperors who declared heresy a crime punishable by death, libraries burned, monasteries raided, monks executed for possessing the wrong books. The Gospel of the Hebrews was hunted with the same fury Rome once used to hunt Christians themselves. But here is what they could not erase: memory. The Church Fathers, in their zeal to condemn, quoted the very texts they sought to destroy. They preserved fragments in their arguments, in their refutations, in their warnings against false doctrine. And those fragments tell a story the bishops never wanted you to hear. In one passage recorded by Jerome, Jesus speaks of his pre-existence, not as the logos of Greek philosophy, but as a soul that stood before God in the beginning, waiting to descend. This is not Christian orthodoxy, this is Jewish mysticism. The belief that great souls exist in the treasury of souls beneath the throne of glory, waiting for the moment of their incarnation. the same belief that would later surface in Kabbalah, in the teachings of Isaac Luria, in the hidden doctrines of the Chassidim. In another fragment, Jesus speaks after the resurrection. He says he has come to abolish the sacrifices, that the age of blood offerings is over. This was heresy to the Jerusalem priesthood, but it was the future. Within a generation, the temple would fall. The sacrifices would cease forever, and the teaching preserved in the Gospel of the Hebrews would prove prophetic. Did Jesus know? Did the authors of this Gospel understand that they were recording the end of an era? There is a fragment that unsettles even scholars who do not believe. It describes Jesus weeping, not at Lazarus's tomb, not in Gethsemane, but in the wilderness after his baptism, when the Spirit descended. He weeps because he has seen what is coming, not just his own death, but the death of the covenant, the scattering of Israel, the rise of a religion in his name that would forget the people he came to save. He weeps because he knows his message will be stolen, translated, transformed, until nothing of the original remains but echoes. The Ebionites, one of the sects that use these Gospels, believed that Paul was a false apostle, that he had corrupted the message, twisted the teachings, invented doctrines that Jesus never spoke. They called him the enemy. They said he had been sent by Satan to lead the Gentiles astray, to build a church on lies. For this belief, they were declared heretics, hunted, erased. By the 5th century, the Ebionites were gone, and with them, their Gospels. But the desert keeps secrets. In 1945, a farmer in Egypt unearthed a jar. Inside were 13 codices, 52 texts, the Nag Hammadi Library, Gnostic Gospels, secret teachings, and among them, echoes of the lost Jewish Gospel, sayings that match the fragments preserved by the Church Fathers, proof that the forbidden texts had survived, hidden, waiting for a time when they could be read without fear. Some of those texts spoke of Sophia, divine wisdom, the feminine aspect of God that had been written out of orthodoxy, reduced to metaphor, stripped of her throne. In the Gospel of the Hebrews, the Holy Spirit is called Mother, not Father, not neuter, Mother. This was the original language, the original vision, before the councils, before the creeds, before the church became an empire and the empire became a church. Scholars now whisper about another discovery, fragments found in the caves of Qumran, among the Dead Sea Scrolls, texts that mention Yeshua, texts that align with the theology of the Ebionites, the Nazarenes, the Jewish followers who never bowed to Rome. These fragments have not been fully published. Some say they never will be, that the implications are too great, that the foundations of Christianity as the world knows it cannot withstand the weight of what those scrolls contain. What if the real gospel is still buried? What if every generation has been given just enough truth to keep them searching, but never enough to set them free? What if the lost gospel of the Hebrews is not lost at all, but hidden, waiting in a cave, in a monastery, in a vault beneath the Vatican, behind doors that have not opened in 1,000 years? The church says the canon is closed. That revelation ended with John on Patmos. But the stones cry out, the sands give up their dead, and the books that were burned are rising from the ashes. They told you the story was finished. They lied.